Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm going to give another talk today from the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. These are a list of 37 sort of tips and tricks to help us unleash our full potential. That's what it is. That's my really brief and simple explanation of what the 37 practices are. And I'm going to talk about this verse today. And then I'm going to first recite the verse, and then I'm going to talk about it and tell a story. So this verse is called Bringing Slander Onto the Path. And thematically, that's kind of what yesterday's talk was too. So thematically, we're sort of in the same area here. We're talking about how we can handle it when people talk bad about us, because that's very hard for us to handle when people slander us, right? So I'm going to read the verse, and then I'm going to talk about it. Even if someone, amid a crowd of many people, reveals one's faults and utters harsh words, it is the practice of the Bodhisattvas to bow to that one respectfully, with the notion that this is one's spiritual teacher. Let me read that again. Even if someone amid a crowd of many people reveals one's faults and utters harsh words, it is the practice of the Bodhisattvas to bow to that one respectfully, with the notion that this is one's spiritual teacher. So maybe this shouldn't be called bringing slander onto the path, because slander, I think, is lies, right? And we're talking about someone who tells everyone about your flaws with harsh words. So tells everyone about your flaws, and they're kind of a jerk about it, right? So that is hard for us to handle, right? And it happens. People will point to your flaws, and I want to suggest that I don't want to talk about other people's flaws, and I want to encourage you to not talk about other people's flaws. But this is the converse of that. It is, well, what do we do when people talk about our flaws, our real flaws, not made up stuff, but our flaws? Bringing slander onto the path is not a good title for this at all. But it's about how we handle it when people point out our shortcomings, because we all have many shortcomings, and some of them we're okay talking about, and other ones we do not want to talk about, right? So I'm going to tell you a story, and that's how I want to talk about this, because of the way we're going over the same very similar material. It makes me want to tell stories just to keep the talks going. And this is the story of Atisha and his rude assistant. And it's about how we learn the reason why we say that this is our spiritual teacher, the person that points out our faults, is because, one, we shouldn't think so highly of ourselves. Forcing us to face our faults is actually helpful. It is through facing our faults that we improve. And if someone's pointing them out, it's a lot harder to pretend they don't exist. A lot harder. Not to say we can't still do it, because we are skilled at pretending things don't exist, but it's harder. And then also, it teaches us patience, to be patient with other people. It teaches us how to have equanimity, how to face hardship. The hardship of people judging us and looking down on us. It teaches us how to face that. And I mean, better that there be harsh words about real things than made up harsh words. You know what I mean? Better that it's our real faults, or a version of our real faults, than just something totally made up that someone's talking about, I think. So I'm going to tell the story of Atisha and his rude assistant. I'm going to make that match what we're talking about. And it doesn't exactly match it, but it's pretty close, and I think it's a good story. A useful story anyway. So in the 11th century, Buddhism in Tibet was beginning to renew itself after a big period of decline. And many Buddhist teachers from India were invited to Tibet to give teachings, because that's what the Tibetans did in those days. They wanted the best teachers from out of town to come teach. And one of them was a man named Atisha. He was a well-known scholar and an expert on training the mind. He was a part of the Bodhisattva tradition, and he committed to staying in Tibet and teaching for a few years, but he ended up staying for the rest of his life. He didn't go back home. And among those, he had a retinue. He had people that traveled with him. And among those that traveled with him was an assistant who cooked meals. His assistant cooked meals, okay? And this assistant was known to be a very difficult person. He was just kind of a jerk. And the Tibetans that met him found him to be very rude and unfriendly. Whereas Atisha is being friendly to everyone he meets and showing boundless compassion and kindness. This guy's kind of a jerk. Like, he's not starting fires or anything, but he's just kind of unpleasant. And the Tibetans were surprised to see that this assistant was really rude to Atisha too. Just a very unfriendly person. Nobody was rude to the master, the great teacher Atisha. So they really wondered, like, why Atisha would bring this person with him. Why would you hang out with somebody who's such an asshole? And Atisha never showed any anger or intolerance toward his assistant. He just accepted the rudeness. And the Tibetans knew that a long perilous journey, like the one Atisha and his assistant had taken from India, could bring out the worst from people sometimes. So they were sort of impressed, like, how can Atisha still have this positive attitude towards his assistant? I could never do that. How can he do that? This guy is such an unpleasant jerk. And for a long time, nobody said anything. They just were surprised and moved by Atisha's patience, but surprised that he would be willing to carry this person around. They thought, like, does Atisha owe him something? What's going on here? And eventually someone found the courage to ask, and he was like, hey, why do you have such an awful person with you? Nobody likes that guy. You don't even like him, I think. And Atisha said, he's not just my cook. He's not just my assistant. He is teaching me to practice patience. With that one statement, Atisha is telling us kind of about what's in this verse. He's telling us how we can transform ourselves through training our minds. How we can respond to others, even those who are causing us harm. So this cook is just being a jerk all the time for no reason. And that is how Atisha is learning how to accept anything. He's really practicing boundless patience and compassion by having this jerk around him. That's not to say, hey, go find an asshole and hang out with them. But it is to say that if people are talking bad about us, if we seem consistently challenged by the people around us, especially the people we can't really get away from, well, maybe we can turn our minds a little bit and view that as an opportunity to practice patience. That's hard. That's really hard. But maybe we can. Again, these are things to aspire to and maybe not necessarily things we can do. So that's what I wanted to talk about for this verse. Just to try to think of it as not all bad when someone is pointing out your faults. So that's it for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Have a good day.